My wife and I got married 8 years ago, but before that, my in-laws decided to force me to sign a prenuptial agreement. At the time, I found that to be a little offensive because they had made it clear to me that I was not really welcome in their family. So forcing me to sign the agreement felt like an even bigger slap in the face after all the work I had been doing. Now that I'm 5 times richer, they want to end it and are pushing my wife toward divorce. I was working in sales when I met my wife, but after a year together, I made the decision to leave my job and launch my own electronics company. We were both 27 at the time, and by the time I decided to formally launch my business, I was almost 28. My wife had been there for me the entire time, and she was the happiest when I finally started working on my dream business. But her parents weren't too thrilled because they believed that I was living off of her money, which was true to some extent because she was helping me out, because I didn't have a steady job. But it's not like I was totally dependent on her. In any case, when I was 29, I proposed to her, and we were married a year later. However, a few months prior to our wedding, her parents approached me and demanded that I sign a prenuptial agreement that specified that all of our assets and money would be retained in the event of a divorce, separate, and I couldn't claim anything that belonged to her, and vice versa. In the event of a divorce, I would also have to pay back my wife and my in-laws for helping me while I was working on my business, because they had occasionally sent money to my wife to support us while we were living together, and it served as a reminder that I owed them money, which at the time I felt was kind of unnecessary. I'm fairly certain that they included, my in-laws had simply assumed that my wife would support me throughout our marriage. So when they approached me with it, they told me that signing off on that clause would be fair, because the second part of the clause stated that even my wife would not be able to stake a claim to anything that was mine. The agreement also stated that if we decided to have a joint account, the money from that would also be divided based on who had contributed more. Would be the only way for them to feel comfortable welcoming me as their son-in-law. Their assumption that I would always be dependent on my wife and never be able to support myself was unfair in and of itself, as I was already putting a lot of effort into starting my business at the time so that I wouldn't be a burden to my wife or anyone else. Secondly, even before I quit, since the first time my wife brought me to her house to introduce me to her parents because they didn't think I was good enough to date their daughter, by good I mean rich, for context, my in-laws, who run a real estate company and have been doing fairly well since they started, had never liked me and had a problem with me. I left their job to start my own business. I didn't exactly have to struggle with money growing up because my parents had normal jobs. My dad was a high school football coach, and my mom was the manager of a nearby coffee shop. But I definitely didn't have the kind of money that my in-laws did, and they looked down on me from the start. It was the same old mean comments and sarcastic remarks wrapped in jokes and other things, and it was just an unbearable and strange behavior around me in general, but I never mentioned it to anyone, even though my wife became very upset about it because I didn't want them to know that they had managed to irritate me. I think the best way to deal with them is to avoid paying them any attention because I knew that my wife and I loved each other, and that was sufficient for us both. I didn't need their approval of her, so even when they came to me with the I was a little offended by the prenuptial agreement, but I signed it anyway, and when they showed it to my wife, she was very upset, but I had talked to her about it beforehand, and she signed it too, without protesting. We both understood exactly what they were trying to do, which was to play games with me and insult me just before the wedding, hoping that I would back off or something, and they could complete what they had set out to do from the beginning, starting to ignore me and somehow persuade their daughter to date someone more suitable by their standards. But sadly for them, they haven't been able to do that yet, and they never will be able to do that, because my wife and I will always be on the same team. That was a few years ago, and since then, I've advanced in my career, my business has grown, and I've continued to work at it. In the last 2 years, it has taken off spectacularly and started doing better than it had ever been. I suppose that social media marketing and all of the hard work I had put into my business had finally begun to pay off, or whatever it was, something had worked out very well for us. Right now, I'm worth nearly 5 times as much as my in-laws. So naturally, they want to dissolve the prenuptial agreement. A few days ago, they came to visit us, and we were all having dinner together. But after dinner, after our son had gone to bed, they asked us to sit down together and explained that they had been thinking about it a lot and that they finally decided it was time to talk to their lawyers and have the prenup dissolved. My wife looked surprised, and I was also a little surprised for a moment, but I chose to decline, telling them directly that I didn't think it was necessary because they had stated that the prenup was the only. Although I tried to sound as sincere as possible, They told me that years had passed and that we now had a son together, so they no longer had any reason to have any doubts about me. Nevertheless, I declined and informed them that I was not open to discussing this anymore, because I did not want them to lose the safety net that came with accepting me as their son-in-law. I was obviously being sarcastic, and I suppose they picked that up. They became agitated and told me that they had originally proposed the prenuptial agreement, so I should respect their opinion and have it dissolved since they no longer believe it is necessary. They also believe that since they are older and more seasoned, we should heed their advice to prevent future animosity. To be honest, I had no idea what they were discussing, but after some back and forth, I informed them that I had no interest in discussing the prenuptial agreement any longer, and since my wife and I had no intention of divorcing anytime soon, they ought to do the same. However, they just wouldn't let it go until it escalated into a fight, and all the drama that we had been ignoring for so long began to surface. I eventually brought up the fact that they had only created the prenuptial agreement and brought it to me in order to embarrass me and remind me that I wasn't in the same tax bracket as them. And now that I had outperformed them, they wanted to act as though nothing had happened. They said that they only wanted their daughter's future to be safe because should I turn out to be a gold-digging husband who would take advantage of her for the duration of our marriage, they wanted her to at least have a safety net in the form of that prenuptial agreement. For a while, but eventually I was too exhausted to argue with them any longer. So I told them that I was done and that I wanted them to leave. I felt that I was being perfectly reasonable when I asked them to leave because we were becoming too noisy, and I didn't want to wake my son, and it was late at night, so I just wanted him to leave so that I could sleep and forget about this. However, they took offense at that and claimed that the only reason I had even been able to reach this point was due to the support I received from them and their daughter. I would argue that they had never helped me, only their daughter Ed. I am aware that I had initially stated that they occasionally sent money to us while I was still working on my business, and we could have easily survived without their assistance as well, because I did have some savings of my own, and the only times they sent money were when my wife asked for it, and that money was specifically for her own use, because sometimes she would run short after all the household expenses for us. I was really thankful to them for that, but it wasn't for me. Rather, it was for their daughter. Instances, but she advised me not to, since she was aware that her parents owned the money and they would not object as long as it was going to her. In other words, technically they did support us, but only for the benefit of their daughter. They never trusted me, and as for helping me emotionally, let's not even talk about that. They had never made me feel like a member of the family, and they had no right to claim that I wouldn't have reached the point where when I told them that, they began to yell at me even louder. And the argument only got worse because they felt that I was being ungrateful by telling them that they had nothing to do with my success. At one point, they turned to my wife and told her that she needed to make a decision. I believe that I could have easily accomplished what I am today without their support, and they had no role in it, so they had no right to be throwing it in my face like that. Choice now because they had attempted to maintain our relationship for as long as they could, but things were getting out of control because I refused to acknowledge their contributions in any way. My wife was able to persuade them to leave, and we haven't spoken since. She has continued to communicate with her parents and has been attempting to get them to apologize, despite my refusal to do so. They are free to visit her and even have the same relationship with our son, but all I ask is that they give me some space, because I don't feel like I'm interested in mending our relationship right now, especially after everything that happened the other day. The fight had been coming for a while, and I'm honestly shocked that we were able to avoid that kind of tearful exchange for so long. Done and dusted, and I just want to avoid them. But my wife recently told me that they were trying to brainwash her into divorcing me last night, while she was trying to persuade them to apologize to me for everything they said and for mistreating me over the years. She brought her phone to me and showed me a number of messages, and she appeared quite upset because she had been working so hard to restore normalcy because my son truly cares for his grandparents, and she simply didn't want strange things to happen with the family. To be honest, neither did I. But after reading those messages, I'm not so sure anymore because they were denying that they had ever mistreated me and acting as though they had every right to do so, even if it was embarrassing. For me, in addition to defending their own actions, they were also accusing me of being ungrateful for support, which I no longer believe existed, and they believe that this is the reason my wife should reconsider our marriage and think about getting a divorce before it's too late, because I don't love her enough to respect her family, and I'm also suspicious of her now that I have some money of my own. It's all bullshit that they're trying to feed her. She gets brainwashed into divorcing me, but she doesn't believe any of it. She's just tired of trying to reason with them. The only reason she believes they have something to say is that they have, albeit unintentionally, provided us with some financial support in our early days when I was starting my business and she was covering all the costs. I don't feel like admitting that though, because it was obviously only because it had nothing to do with me. And if my wife had let me, I would have contributed during that time using my savings, and we wouldn't have needed to rely on them at all. In addition, they had always made sure that I never felt like I belonged in the family and treated me as though I was with my wife just for the money. So it's not like I didn't have to deal with the fallout. So I'm sorry for not being grateful. I don't really have a problem with ending the prenuptial agreement. I just had a problem with the timing of it all, because my wife and I recently made some large purchases for ourselves that are under my name. It's not a big deal to her or to me, because I know that we love each other and that we will work things out no matter how much we argue. Thank you, in-laws, for supporting my wife and me when I was just starting out with my business, even fighting. Right now, just her opinion that she is placed, and I'm thinking about it. I'm not rejecting it outright. But I suppose my in-laws have been thinking about it on their own, which is why they made this decision at this time. It's just the timing that got to me, because they still suspect me and believe that they care about my wife and always have their daughter's best interests in mind, interests at heart, but I don't, which is why they always have to put me down. It's clear that they still don't accept me as a member of the family, and that's what I have a problem with. I haven't paid them back for all of the money they gave us in the beginning, but I have no problem doing so if they ask for it. The only reason I haven't offered it myself yet is because I didn't believe I owed them that, because at this point in time, I believe we can say that whatever money they had contributed was for their daughter, so it had always been given to her directly, and I had no role in it. My wife hasn't had to spend much on some personal expenses since my business started making money. So I believe my debt is low. As soon as my business started making money, my wife didn't have to spend a single dollar out of her own pocket. Has been fixed in that manner. But even after that, if my in-laws feel that I should reimburse them now, I would be happy to do so if it would ease their burden. Hello everyone. So it has been a week since my argument with my in-laws, and based on what I've read so far, people have differing views about my circumstances, but I've decided that I will return all of the money because I do have an obituary figure and I'm doing well for myself now. So I want to be able to defend myself without them putting this in my face. And the only way to resolve this issue is to reimburse them for all the money they say they contributed to our early days. I talked to my wife about this idea, and she believes it's sufficient because she doesn't want to feel like I'm indebted to them forever and that I have to worship the ground they walk on. Her parents are still trying to brainwash her into divorcing me because they believe I have repeatedly disrespected them, but they have never considered the fact that they have also repeatedly disrespected me and even my family. If they can't take it when I treat them the same way they have treated me and my family for years, I don't think they have the right to be doing it. In addition, I believe that I was fairly courteous to them before the argument began, and they began to bring up personal matters and go below the belt. But they have always been openly hostile to me and have never even pretended to like me or my family. So I believe that my behavior toward them was reasonable after years of repressing my emotions and doing my best to show respect. Since they have never offered me emotional support or even pretended to accept me, I will owe them nothing at all by repaying the money. My wife and I are both very worn out from attempting to handle the current situation, so we are hoping that sending them a check will take care of everything. Normally, I don't do that in relationships because I know that throwing money at something won't fix it, but with them, I believe that's the case. They are so materialistic and self-centered that I can't imagine any other parents in the world attempting to destroy their daughter's marriage, especially when a child is involved. Their belief that their own ego is larger and more significant than everything else simply shows how much they genuinely care for her and how much they like to act as though they have her best interests at heart. But the truth is that the only thing that matters is that my wife told her parents earlier today that I was prepared to write them a check and end the situation because it was becoming too much for them to handle, even for her. And since all of this had begun because of the money, perhaps writing them a check to repay them for everything they had done for us in the past would make things better. However, of course, that did not fix anything. What they care about is their image. their ego, and themselves. Anything. And they took offense at the idea that they could be bought out. They told my wife that this was not about the money, which is odd because, based on their behavior the other day during our argument, it seemed like it was all about the money. Now, however, it's about the respect I've never given them, which is crazy because I can actually claim the same thing for them and my wife, and I'm not even sure what they're referring to the fact that I've always been courteous and civil with them. It's they who have always treated me rudely. I have never disrespected them, but they believe that this one instance of my refusal to acknowledge them and express gratitude for their initial support of us is equivalent to years and years of them exploiting my affection for their daughter and persistently attempting to. It is not the same thing at all for them to treat me or my family members with the utmost disrespect. Even my wife now acknowledges that they did not support me as much as they are saying they did, and I have already promised to reimburse them. So I won't owe them anything, so we don't see the issue. If this is going to be about respect rather than money, I don't think I owe them anything for reasons that I have. As previously stated, fortunately, they are not talking to me at the moment. Instead, they are only interacting with their daughter. My wife is totally on my side. They are still attempting to brainwash her into getting a divorce, and they have now begun telling her that she needs to start taking care of our son and other things. I find it so pitiful that destroying our marriage won't be worth it to resume a normal relationship with them after all of this. It's been a little more than 2 weeks since my altercation with my in-laws, and for the past few days, my wife has not been responding to them because she believes it's a lost battle, even though she has tried. This is enough for them to need my wife to file for custody because of their own ego. I mean, I think this is reason enough for me to not respect them at all. Best to explain to your parents why they were mistaken, but they insisted that she file for divorce. She became weary of attempting to resolve the matter on her own, and they made it apparent that they were no longer interested in resolving the matter, so she stopped responding to them. As a result, they chose to visit our home today. I opened the door for them, but they disregarded me, entered right away, and began phoning my wife. At this point, I was even shocked that they were acting this way after accusing me of not showing them respect. They are hypocrites, and they will always act this way. I remained silent and waited for my wife to come out. When she eventually did, she told her parents that she didn't want to talk to them until they were prepared to accept our side of the story. They began telling her that she was acting in the same manner as me and was becoming more disrespectful to them. So I was here to confront her about it. She should also remember that when her parents made that statement, she lost her temper and began yelling at them, which was justified because she was their daughter and they had only done things for her, not asked her to do anything for them. As a result, they no longer had the right to hold her accountable. It's not like other parents don't do things like this for their kids, but they do it out of love, and not because they want to throw this in their faces later, like my in-laws. As for gratitude, we had done our best to be grateful to them and show them respect despite their actions. It was against her because it had all been done of their free will, and if they had wanted to, they could have easily declined, and we could have still made it work without their help. Absurd behavior with me and my family over the years even, though we had remained silent and had tolerated it in private because we didn't want to start a fight and wanted to show them respect so that the family's harmony was preserved. However, at this point, it was impossible to avoid confronting them, and they now have to understand that they can't always demand respect. Sometimes they have to earn it. And this is one of those. My wife ended up fighting with them for a while, but I remained silent and stood in the corner, because I didn't want to talk to them at all. After a while, my wife became agitated, so I went to her side to help her calm down. My in-laws began to panic and blame me for everything, saying that it all began because I had refused to dissolve the prenuptial agreement and that I had to correct them. He claimed that this had not begun because of that. Instead, it began when they decided to treat me badly because I did not come from the same group of wealthy children that they had expected their daughter to choose from when choosing a life partner. They had been furious about this for years, and that is why they had always treated me badly. I decided to put up with it because I did not want to make a big deal out of it. They needed to understand that they couldn't get away with it all the time, which is why I had refused to dissolve the prenuptial agreement. They needed to know that I wouldn't be their puppet and follow their instructions. Things became even more heated after that because I was now involved, but I remained composed and didn't let them get to me. They kept yelling at me, calling me names, and cursing me to get my attention, but I simply wouldn't allow them to get under my. They became even more irate when I told them that's exactly what they wanted, and when they finally realized they couldn't reach me. They told my wife that she had to make a serious decision between her family and me. She said she would choose her family, which meant she would choose her husband and son, and she told her parents to leave her house because they would soon be getting the check. Her parents were shocked because they clearly had not anticipated this reaction from her and had likely assumed that they would be given another chance, because that is what typically occurs. But in all honesty, my wife and I have had enough. When they attempted to argue, my wife threatened to call the police and have them arrested if they did not leave right away, and they eventually did. It's going to be difficult to explain to our son why he can't see his grandparents anymore. But it's okay, because he has another set of grandparents who love him just as much. Perhaps in the future, we can make amends. But for now, this must be done. We had tried really hard to work things out with them, but regrettably, I don't think they want to, that they only want things to go their way, which is no longer feasible. I'm genuinely happy that I stood up for myself and my wife. A few issues needed to be resolved, and we are delighted to have dealt with the current circumstances.